Welcome to Arabs in Media, the podcast that breaks down how Arabs are featured in entertainment, media, and lately, especially the news. I am Hazem Jamal, your host, and today we have a special guest joining us. We'll have intros in just a moment. Don't forget to subscribe at Substack, where you get more information and conversation on our topics. I've been traveling for a little bit, and I'm happy because I'm visiting family and pleased to be joined by our special guest today, my very own sister, Najwa.
Hello.
That was very delicate. Don't be fooled. Najwa is my older sister. We grew up together and have a lot of shared common experiences growing up. Arab, obviously. But then there are some things where we didn't overlap. And Najwa just got back from a trip to the Arab world. So I hope you'll share some interesting tidbits of your experience from that and observations.
Of course.
Great. In the news this week, as of this recording, after a brutal week on Palestinians again, 9 months into this, Israeli strikes killed multiple civilian targets at 4 schools, safe zones, refugee camps. It is hard to get it straight because they're so constant. And it's meant, I think, to fuck us up in the head and, make us look away and kind of try to forget it because it's so horrible. But it's real. And it was only topped by, in the last 24 hours, another Israeli airstrike on a refugee camp, the El Mouassi refugee camp. More upsetting is that many Western headlines, BBC, New York Post, the list goes on. They avoid so many basic key contextual details in the headlines, like how many people were killed, or they leave that number to hearsay, or they make it questionable in their languaging. They'll leave out key details that it was a designated safe zone. They're constantly providing cover for war crimes. It's very saddening and maddening at the same time. We will talk a little bit more on that and what you can reference yourself at home as a consumer to see what's real. We'll reveal that in our upcoming shout-out segment at the end. Lancet, the British medical journal, highly acclaimed, one of the best, released an article claiming that the death toll in Gaza could be actually not 35 or 39,000, but 186,000 people, humans. For example, they take very simple statistics. As of this past February, more than a third of the buildings in the Gaza Strip had been destroyed. That's from last February. The number of bodies still buried in the rubble is likely substantial. The estimates of that, at least 10,000. The other factor that brings that number up is that even if the conflict ended now, there would be many indirect deaths in the coming months and years from causes such as communicable diseases, non-communicable disease, reproductive issues, ecocide. These bombs are not clean. They have destroyed the environment. The total death toll is expected to be massive, largely because of the intensity of this conflict, healthcare having been destroyed, infrastructure gone, forced starvation, food, water, shelter, constant displacement, not just once, not just twice, but almost weekly, sometimes multiple times in a week, to safe zones, quote unquote. And of course, as we just mentioned, many of those safe zones constantly attacked with Israeli airstrikes. And, when the final number comes out, I don't know what to think of people who then embrace the number and think, oh, we did a wrong. We did a bad. It's a very sad place we're in. My sister Najwa, here in front of me,
Yes.
recently took a trip to the Arab world. But first, walk me through a little bit of how growing up Arab was for you.
Well, I think it first stuck out for me because my name is different. So starting probably in school when attendance was taken or people would ask, what is your name? It's like, what kind of name is that? Where are you from? Where's Baghdad? Or,
Mm-hmm.
So But that was just feeling different at the time, more so than anything else. Also, though, the media would portray a lot of Arabs in movies and such as the bad guys. So that, I think, was something that I saw but didn't realize affected me really until later on.
Were you aware of other factors outside of entertainment or like movies and TV? Like for me, one of my early memories of the mood of the country changing was OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. I think it was in 73, somewhere between 73 and 76 is a number I should know, a year I should know. But they increased the price of oil dramatically and it hit our economy. And I just remembered the anti-Arab sentiment, like overnight ratcheting up. Like I was like, where did this come from?
Yeah. I do vaguely remember that. I also remember more so with the hostages in Iran.
I remember the mood changing dramatically when that happened because it really fed into xenophobia and jingoism. And it's something that we haven't shaken. Like I remember the first Gulf War being at the gym, knowing that we were facing these imposed UN deadlines to have Iraq withdraw from Kuwait, or otherwise this coalition was going in. And I was at a gym and I just remembered overhearing these guys were like, huge weights, dropping barbells, being, macho men. And they were yelling things like, yeah, we're going to go over there and kick some fucking Arab ass. And I was thinking, fuck you, man. My cousins live there.
I remember being with a group of people and they were talking about the hostages and all that. They were doing the same type of thing. And then somebody said something to me or something. And another person's like, oh, no, she's okay. She's from Iraq, not Iran.
What do you do with that?
I know. And then obviously changed later than when Iraq was.
Yeah, it was our turn pretty quick after that. If you're brown, it's eventually your turn.
Yeah.
So tell me about how that affected you from a psychological standpoint. We didn't have Arab community where we lived.
Right.
We had appreciation for it, but we didn't have like other kids who are our age in the same school system. Like we would have to, visit friends of the family in different parts of the city or the state or something like that if we were going to meet somebody. And those visits were always rewarding.
Yes.
Because we met other people who, made us feel less isolated. But that said, you probably experienced some of the outward, like things like, simple things like pronouncing your name or where are you from or that.
Right. Yeah. Teachers would say, oh, do you have a nickname?
Oh.
I had friends and nobody, I think, treated me poorly as far as my friends go, but I always felt very different. And I felt like, why can't I have a name like Kathy or something like that? Which now I look back and go, oh my God, why did I say that?
I'm so glad you're not my sister Kathy.
Yeah.
Nothing against anybody named Kathy,
Right.
but you're so not her.
And yeah, I wish I just, everything, even in magazines, entering my teen years and all the models were blonde, like Christy
Right.
Brinkley and all that. And now you have a whole diverse group of models and people out there. But at that time, I just felt like I stuck out.
Did you ever face anything outwardly aggressive outside of the, a lot of the stuff that I'm hearing is ignorance and some passive aggressive language or behavior. You don't know what somebody's intentions are when they say, where are you from? But when you have a different name or an ethnic name growing up in the States, you get to a point where you kind of sense pretty quickly where it's coming from.
Yeah, I don't think it wasn't until I feel for myself, 9/11 is when it became like when anybody would ask, oh, what kind of name is that? Or where are you from? Then I'd be like, where are you from?
People forget too that, after the Oklahoma City bombing of the federal
right.
building,
Yeah.
The way CNN covered it at the time is they almost within the hour had reported that, somebody Middle Eastern looking had left the scene. And of course it was a white nationalist
Right. And
Timothy McVeigh, who had killed all of these children and people who were there and at the nursery center.
And you notice how the wording changed too, because even to this day, when there's mass shooting, Sandy Hook, whatever, it's not a terrorist shooting. But when it's an Arab involved, then it's a terrorist.
I think we have a pretty sick society anyway when it comes to violence, not just gun violence here, but violence in other parts of the world, like, Palestine, Iraq, those types of scenarios. It satisfies a very sick psyche that exists in this country. If we were truly pro-peace, then we wouldn't be committing so much violence.
Also, from all that violence comes more violence. So when you have 9/11 happen, or groups like ISIS or the Taliban or whatever, it's coming out of the violence that had started to begin with the U.S.
Yeah. We didn't even talk about how Iraq came to be from a perspective of the Second War. We've talked about this offline many times as a family about how, seeing how the repercussions of 9/11 were, on some level, they did early strikes before the State of the Nation in January with George Bush, where they seemed to be strategically targeting specific areas. But it was very soon after that where we did the State of the Union and announced that there was this axis of evil and Iraq was one of them. And I was like, what? I shouted at the TV. I literally yelled because I knew what was coming.
It was just setting it up, right?
And this is something we don't reconcile as a country.
No. And we know now that everything was based on a lie, and 1 million Iraqis died from that.
Yeah.
And also U.S. soldiers died and came back with a lot of mental PTSD, etc.
All right, so let's talk about your recent trip. You recently went on a trip to Morocco, and you were not alone. You were with a travel group, right? They do these tours that might involve cultural activities or yoga or different things. Of people who are interested in exploring and being open-minded and tasting the flavors of a new place. So tell us about your trip to Morocco.
Yeah, we went throughout Morocco, many different cities in Morocco, and we had a tour guide and a bus driver and a helper and different tour guides also throughout the whole trip. And it was a beautiful trip, beautiful country. I highly recommend it. I was with a group of people who varied from like 40s to 60s, 70s years old. I asked people during the trip, towards the end of the trip, I said, what surprised you about Morocco the most? And I got a lot of answers that were like, oh, the people are so nice. And, oh, the men are so nice and gentle and funny. And I questioned further to say, like, well, why did you think you thought that they wouldn't be? Or, that you were expecting something different. And I said, was it the media, the way it portrays Arab men? And they were like, oh, yeah, that is why we thought it would be different. So after the trip, I just thought to myself, like, wow, I hope they all go home and tell their friends and family how wonderful the Arab people are, and that they can keep spreading that word, because the Western media certainly isn't doing us any favors here. And it also gave me the feeling of, for myself, of a more belonging, because every time I told somebody my name, they were like, oh, Najwa. And compared to where I'm here and I say my name, is like, what? How do you say that name? Najwa? So everybody knew exactly that, oh, you're an Arab by your name. And just treated me they treated everybody kind, but I think I got a little special kindness there too. And I just felt this feeling of belonging that I never felt really in the U.S. I mean, I've, born and raised here, but I think something just stuck out during that trip to make me feel like, oh, I just feel more a part of this society, even though I'm not. I just felt the warmth of everybody. It just felt so much better than here, because our culture has a lot of different things that I don't necessarily like. Violence, whatever,
Like no society is perfect. And, there's plenty of room for reform, evolution, education, change in every country in this world and in every society. And what kind of gets at me when conversations happen where people kind of try to almost justify how Arab countries are bombed because they'll say, well, because of, they have hijab laws. And it's like, really?
They don't like our freedom.
And it just takes exposure to another culture in general to kind of like wipe your mind of this poison that you get from, basically sources that are making money over the fact that they're instilling fear in you.
Right. And that would be, anywhere you visit, you're going to notice like, wow, these people are very nice. But the way our media portrays Arabs, immigrants, and so on, if you don't know, you're just hearing what you hear.
So we've introed a little bit that I worked in the radio industry for my entire career. And very early on, after the first Gulf War, just a quick story, I was at a radio convention. And they had a couple of keynote addresses, and one of them was John Holliman. I don't know if you remember that name, but he was one of the early reporters during probably the biggest heyday of CNN. And he was one of the two people who were in the El Rashid Hotel in Baghdad when the first Gulf War started on Iraq. So he and Bernard Shaw, and this was kind of like a watershed moment in media news coverage because they were live when most media outlets had kind of been locked out of this. So the world was tuned to CNN, seeing all of this night vision attack on Baghdad. And so I saw him at this convention, and he gave an interesting speech, and it was really more about media and news coverage. And he actually predicted at the time, the way media was going, that one of our news networks was probably not going to be around anymore in 10 years. I think he was partially right because he was talking about the diversification of news and how expensive news was. So as witness, we get a lot more interesting and sometimes truthful coverage from our social media feeds from people on the ground than we do from the typical anchors or old news outlets. So I walked up to him afterwards and I said, "Hey, how did you find the Iraqi people?" And he just would not stop about how accommodating and generous and kind the average person in Iraq was, even under the specter of being bombed away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you explain that to anybody else? Unless you are Arab already, you know that the famous Arab hospitality is just something we have. It's something we do. It's who we are. And just the injustice of being so kind in that sense, yet being the punching bag of this war machine is one of the, and not just the war machine, but like the media component to it that helps us on the American side and the Western Europe side go along with it mentally when these wars break out, because they've seen something that kind of helps them justify whether they're aware of it or not.
They dehumanize them, the Arabs, so that it's easier for people to agree with a war.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that your travel group got a glimpse to the joys of international travel, first and foremost. Secondly, the fact that travel in the Arab world is also worth exploring, but you'll find more than anything else often that, Arab hospitality is unequaled, unparalleled, that it is a cultural joy to experience. And you'd be pleasantly surprised, I think, if you were to take that trip.
Definitely.
Any highlights of Morocco in terms of the city that you would have to see? If you only had 3 days and you had one city that you could go to?
Probably Marrakesh. Actually, Marrakesh has about 25% European people there, but it's got, everything there. Yves Saint Laurent lived there for a while. I don't know if you knew that.
No?
Yeah. And his place has been turned into like a museum, botanic garden, which is a must-see. But got everything there, the food, the colors, the people. It's got everything.
I'm just looking up real quick on the No Thanks app. Is Yves Saint Laurent on there?
Probably, I would not. I would be surprised if he was.
Yeah, I think that's probably been sold like a million times over.
He loved Morocco.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I think he lived there, I don't know, like towards the end of his life, and his partner lived there after he passed. And then when his partner passed, they turned it into a museum, like a botanic garden.
It's not on this app. It doesn't mean it's not a no, but that's good news.
Yeah.
And he lived there with his partner, so I'm assuming
they were
openly LGBTQ couple in Morocco. Many countries across the world have just different approaches to it, you know. But anyway, enough of that right now. So before we wrap up, I just want to, again, welcome everybody to the Substack at Arabs in Media. Make sure you like and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice as well. Please give us a review. Please share the content, build the community, and to, you know, hopefully inform and empower people to what's going on in the Arab world when it comes to media coverage and how we can do better. I do want to wrap up with a segment called The Shout Out. And this is a way for us to kind of like throw props out to people who are doing something interesting, good, and something worth of recognition. So we'll start with you.
Yes, I wanted to do a shout out to the wonderful guide and driver and helper in Morocco on my tour. That would be Ibrahim, our guide, Majid, our driver, and Mohammed, our helper. They were just so wonderful, and they made our trip just 100 times better. Thank you.
Glad to hear that. So Ibrahim and who else?
Majid and Mohammed.
That's great. Wonderful. My shout out this week is to a new app. It's actually in testing right now. So it's called NewsCord, C-O-R-D. Their website is newscord.org. It's a new website that's powered by AI. What they're doing is aggregating news coverage to show shocking but not surprising coverage between all of the news outlets. So they'll take a particular story and they'll do an AI aggregation of all of these stories to show how these things are languaged and to reveal media bias. This is better than actually going to each individual news outlet and trying to see for yourself where those are. So look for NewsCord, NEWSCORD on Instagram. Highly recommend it. Many Western outlets ignored the number of Palestinians who were killed in the headlines of this last bombing of a refugee safe zone. And when you compare it, for example, to the Russian missile strike on Kiev, which was also horrible, the language is shockingly different. I mean, the Russian missile strike on the Kiev Children's Hospital, the language was very often emotional. We deserve that too for any sort of killing of humanity. And Western media bias is in black and white and in color on these print websites. When you see it side by side, it's unbelievable. Dehumanization is real. It can be subtle, and language is important. It's as important as covering the story itself. So that's it for Arabs in Media this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, genocide is always wrong. Always, always, always wrong. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, Najwa, for being our special guest.
Thank you.